Recently, a group of educators got together to discuss a serious issue in the state and in the upcoming election, the future of public education. We asked them what they want voters to know before walking into a voting booth. Here's what they had to say.
What I want people to know is that while Republicans are trying to convince voters that they are the reasonable voices on education funding, nothing could be further from the truth. Because people know I'm a teacher and I pay attention to this stuff, they frequently ask me who they should vote for. I tell them, and now these listeners, to ignore all the talk and to focus on which party or candidate's actions support public education. In my experience, Democrats have consistently shown that support. Republicans have not. For example, in 2021, after the Wisconsin GOP had cut education budgets for a decade, the new Democratic administration introduced a $1.8 billion budget to get Wisconsin schools back on track. The budget included items like increases in special education funding and investments in school-based mental health services and early childhood education that had been ignored for years. There was also additional funding to maintain the tuition freeze for UW students and an expansion of tuition assistance for low-income college students. These are all programs that support our most vulnerable students and expand educational opportunities for students that might not normally have access to those opportunities. Plus, these are investments that directly impact working families and are popular with Wisconsinites regardless of their politics. How did Republicans respond to this pro-education, pro-student, pro-working family budget? The Republican legislator responded by actually cutting $1.4 billion from that budget. Now, the state was already sitting on a $2.8 billion budget surplus, so putting some of that money back into public education, a service we all benefit from, seemed like a no-brainer, but Republicans refused to spend a single penny of the surplus on education and actually ended up approving fewer funds than they had 2 years prior. When I say ignore the rhetoric and focus on actions, this is a perfect example of Democrats trying to invest in educational opportunities for all, and Republicans undercutting those efforts. All students in schools struggle when they're not properly funded, but we need to remember that it's especially rough on our rural districts. State education funding is based in part on number of students and overall population. Since rural counties like Dorr and Kewaunee have fewer students and fewer full-time residents, they get less money from the state, but they still have the same fixed costs of maintaining schools and sports facilities. That means less money available to pay teachers and staff. Education is a calling. We certainly don't teach for the money, but teachers have grocery bills, housing payments, and utility bills like most people. So who can blame experienced teachers for moving on to bigger districts with larger budgets and better salaries? When that happens, it leaves rural schools without that experience, and it hurts our students and communities. Okay, so I know that's a lot to take in, but the reality is this. Until our legislature commits to properly funding public education, our students and schools, especially those in rural areas, will always be at a disadvantage. And as was already talked about, the Republican-backed voucher program is taking hundreds of thousands of dollars of funds from those already stretched rural schools and sending it to private schools. For me, it comes down to this. Democrats have shown us that they are prepared to make that investment. Republicans, regardless of what they say, have shown us they are not.
So then I just have one final question. Who are you voting for in November and why?
I'll be voting for Democrats because they vote for budgets that support students, educators, and schools.